Hello again, my name is Jason and we're going to be talking about Dune today. I was introduced first to Dune through the movie, the David Lynch movie. I don't know if any of you have seen that. Personally, I enjoy it. It's one of those things where I enjoy it not because of what it necessarily tries to be, but for actually what it is. Anyway, when I was younger, I came downstairs and my dad was watching a movie. It turned out to be Dune. Freaked me out at first. I mean, Baron Harkonnen is incredibly creepy in the David Lynch movie. But it was my first introduction to Dune. I found out later that it came from a book, and I read the book, and let me tell you, the book is amazing. Just amazing. Frank Herbert wrote 5 novels in the Dune series. He wrote Dune, The Heretics of Dune, Children of Dune, God Emperor of Dune, and Chapter House Dune. And then he passed away. And you may have been sitting there going, well, there's all these other Dune novels. Well, supposedly Brian Herbert, his son, found a safety deposit box that his father had, and in this box he had put outlines for future Dune stories. And so he teamed up with another author, I forget who off the top of my head, and what they did was they went and they fleshed out these stories and they added more to the Dune universe. So there are a couple things like there are no computers in the Dune universe. Why? Millennia ago, there was an uprising by the machines. The humans finally won, and as such, computers were basically outlawed. And so humans had to become computers. So you have a class of people called the Mentats, who's basically their brains are so structured and they are trained in such a way that they are basically computing machines for humanity. They have the ability to calculate faster than a machine, kind of thing. Anyway, back to Dune. As you can see from the picture I have over here behind me, that way. Anyway, Dune, when it came out, it won the Hugo Award and the Nebula Award for Best Science Fiction Novel of the Year. Awesome. Science fiction isn't usually my usual genre, but for Dune, I really enjoyed the book Dune. And I've read the others in the series, written by Frank Herbert. I've read a few by his son. I haven't read the 2 that were the supposed continuation of it, which is Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. I'm going to read them, but I haven't gotten to them yet. Anyway, so Dune. In the Dune universe, there is a planet called Arrakis, often called Dune. It's a desert planet, and on this planet, there is a resource called spice, or melange. Melange is the formal term. Spice is what everybody calls it. It's harvested here on the planet Dune, and they use this spice everywhere. It's people can ingest it, and it increases their lifespan. It expands human abilities, and it actually enables. It's not really faster than light travel, but it is. So the Spacing Guild has a monopoly on interstellar travel. But anyway, there's a lot of things. So Arrakis, the planet Dune, represents wealth and power. And at the beginning of the book, Paul Atreides and his family are going from their planet to Dune to take over. The planet had been run by the Harkonnen family, and there's a huge feud between the Harkonnens and the Atreides that has lasted for years. So the Atreides are going in, eyes open, knowing that this is probably a trap, but not being able to refuse this because it is a huge honor that they're being given by the Emperor. Well, they go to take over Dune. The Harkonnens have left, and they find on the planet Dune the local population, spice miners basically, and then there are the Fremen. The Fremen are the natives of Dune. And Paul becomes kind of the center of what's going on. There's a group in the Dune world called the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood, and they've been for years promoting genetic manipulation, not on the lines of like actual going in and messing with DNA, but through bloodlines, marrying this person to that person, and making sure they have a son or a daughter according to their specific guidelines, so that they can bring forth their Messiah. And the Fremen start to believe that it's Paul, that Paul is this Messiah that's come to lead them. There's so much that's going on behind the scenes. There's the political aspects of the power shifting inside the empire. There's the emperor of the known universe is there, and he's orchestrating some things because the Atreides family are getting too popular with the other nobles and things, and he's worried that it might become a problem in the future. So he is in league with the Harkonnens, and he arranged this so that the Atreides would take over Arrakis, and then the Harkonnens could use that to destroy the Atreides and then retake Arrakis. And unfortunately, the Duke Leto Atreides, Paul's father, is killed pretty soon, and Paul and his mother manage to escape into the desert, and they link up with the Fremen, and they use Paul's training, because Paul's been training since he was young in martial arts, in using various almost mental powers, almost, not quite, in order to not necessarily fulfill this role of being this Messiah. It's called the Kwisatz Haderach, but he's there, and there's so many things that you find out, like the Spacing Guild, for instance. The Spacing Guild needs the spice. They've actually ingested so much of it that it has mutated them, and they cannot live without it. And this mutation has allowed them to expand their consciousness, where they can join two separate points of space and kind of form a bridge between them and then move across. And that's how they accomplish space travel. Guns are not used in this future. People use knives and swords. Why do they use knives and swords rather than guns? The personal force shield was developed, and people wear it on their belts. And what happens is when you turn this force shield on, bullets just bounce off you. But they do have smart bullets that will slowly drill through the shield, and then once it's through, it'll speed up and kill you. But people don't use energy weapons, for instance, because they found that if you shoot someone who's shielded, it could cause basically a nuclear explosion. And so because of this threat of nuclear explosion anytime you accidentally shoot someone with a shield, laser guns, energy weapons of that nature are not used very often. So people have gone and they now practice and fight with swords again. And there's just and then you kind of go back to like the David Lynch movie, and he tried to take his name off of it later. He was the director, and he wanted to be attributed as Alan Smithy later. Look it up; it's hilarious. You go back to the movie, and in the movie, instead of using just, I don't know, making the Fremen out to be the best fighting force in the galaxy because they've lived in this oppressive environment that where only the strongest have survived. They used sonic weapons. It's funny where you yell and your voice is amplified into the ability to shatter stone and just destroy people. But the Fremen, so they live in a desert, and the Fremen use what are called still suits. And the still suits capture all the moisture from you. They capture it when you breathe out, and they recycle your bodily fluids so that you can then capture this moisture and then re-ingest it so that you don't die in the desert. And you find out that this spice is linked heavily linked to giant sandworms. That's where these Dune sandworms come from. If you haven't seen the movie Dune, but you have seen the Lord of the Rings, or not Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit trilogy that Peter Jackson just did, think Battle of Five Armies, those giant worms that pop out of the ground and then for some reason don't just destroy all the dwarves but go back into their holes. Those are the sandworms. Which the Fremen use. They ride these sandworms from place to place across the desert. Whole tribes of them climbing up onto these giant sandworms to travel across huge tracts of the desert. And the sandworms themselves are sonically sensitive. So when you have these spice trawlers that are out in the desert gathering the spice, it eventually attracts a sandworm. And so you have to be careful, very careful when you're mining spice, to always have a spotter and to be able to quickly get out of there, because the sandworms are large enough that these spice trawlers that patrol the desert and gather up the spice, they're easily engulfed and just eaten by these giant sandworms. So you just have to be careful. So Paul goes from a lush ocean world to this dry dune, where he meets up with the plots of the Harkonnens and the Emperor, and they end up then out in the desert among the Fremen, waging a guerrilla war against the Harkonnen and ultimately against the Emperor himself. So, like I said, it's kind of an interesting mix of science fiction and at the same time low tech, because you have these giant ships that travel through space, but at the same time you have no computers. If you have codified into the culture and into the law that no one can make a machine in the image of a man's mind. And so even calculators are dangerously close to being able to replicate human thought. And so because of this, you have, like I said, the mentats who have enhanced their mental capability to perform those computing feats that we used to rely on computers for. And there's different factions. There's the Fremen, there's the Emperor, there's the Harkonnens, there's the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood. There's all these people that are working at cross purposes at times, and sometimes allying with each other and trying to push forward their own agenda. So there's just the plot is so deep and so rich. One of the things when I've read the main books that Frank Herbert wrote in the Dune series, and like I said, Dune is the best. Dune is by far the best. The rest are okay, but Dune is the best of the series. As for some of the others, I've read some of the others by Frank Herbert's son, and I want to say Anderson, but that might not be the case. The other author that has been working on them, they just haven't been as good as the ones that were written by Frank Herbert himself. But they do go into more detail about certain things. You hear about the Butlerian Jihad and the wars against the machines, but it wasn't until later that these stories were written, and you found out more about what actually happened before this particular time period. And then there's cloning, there's actually genetic manipulation and stuff, as opposed to the Bene Gesserit sisterhood, whose idea of genetic manipulation is basically marrying two people together and then taking their resulting offspring and marrying them to somebody else, so that they can eventually have their Kwisatz Haderach, I don't remember what they called him. Anyway, like I said, Dune is great. You should read it. If you have any questions about the Dune book, ask in the comments down below. Like and subscribe. And again, if you have any books that you'd like me to talk about, any that you'd like my opinion on, please feel free. Like I said, down in the comments. And until next time.